Good morning. Welcome to your new day. President Trump trying to deflect again from the expanding web of ties between his team and Russia. The president alleging former National Security Advisor Susan Rice improperly unmasked the identity of Trump associates who were caught up in surveillance of foreign targets.
The president wants us to believe he's the victim of, quote, a crooked scheme. But there is no evidence of any wrongdoing. In fact, national security experts say that a national security advisor requesting that an identity be unmasked was a reflection of how much traffic there was involving Trump people and Russians. A very busy day. 75 of the Trump presidency. We have it all covered. Let's begin with CNN's Jim Sciutto live in Washington. Jim, give us all of your latest reporting.
Well, Allison, good morning. The only public comment coming from Rice so far is an aide speaking to us here at CNN, calling the allegation that Rice improperly unmasked the names of Americans false. But set that aside for a moment. I've spoken to senior intelligence officials, former officials from both Democratic and Republican administrations, who say a couple of things. One, unmasking is not unusual. It is done by senior national security officials to get more information about the intelligence they see. It is not illegal. There were protocols put in place after 9/11, processes for doing exactly this, but also, most importantly, it's not public. It is not leaking. That information is shared just between the intelligence briefer and that national security official who asks for that information. This latest publicizing of this effort here and the issues around unmasking appear to be the latest effort to justify the president's unproven allegation that President Obama surveilled him during the campaign. Former President Obama's national security advisor Susan Rice at the center of President Trump's latest attempt to renew his unproven wiretapping claim and divert attention away from his team's contacts with Russia. President Trump seizing on conservative media reports that claim that Ambassador Rice unmasked the names of Trump transition officials caught up in surveillance.
At its core is this was surveillance for apparently political reasons.
Tweeting that he was spied on before the nomination and calling it a crooked scheme. A source close to Rice telling CNN that the allegations that she did anything unusual or improper false. The White House, meanwhile, blasting the media for ignoring the ginned-up scandal.
From a media standpoint, somewhat intrigued by the lack of interest that we've seen in some of these public revelations.
As officials stress that unmasking names in intelligence reports is a routine procedure. Something different from leaking this information to the press.
If somebody feels that there's intelligence value, and of course there's a whole series of procedures that you have to go through, and lawyers look over your shoulder, so there's nothing at all unusual about unmasking.
The administration's latest justification, a far cry from President Trump's initial claim 1 month ago that President Obama wiretapped Trump Tower. An accusation that Mr. Trump has since attempted to redefine.
That really covers surveillance and many other things.
And justify, even after his own FBI director refuted the claim.
I think you're going to find some very interesting items coming to the forefront over the next 2 weeks.
Last week, the Trump administration tried to distort comments made by a former Obama defense official, Evelyn Farkas.
Dr. Farkas's admissions alone are devastating.
To substantiate Trump's contention that Obama spied on him. Farkas says her comments were, quote, wildly misinterpreted. And the week before that, House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes got wrapped up in the White House's diversion.
The president needs to know that these intelligence reports are out there.
Briefing the commander-in-chief and the media before his own committee about classified information of incidental collection on the president's associates.
I very much appreciated the fact that they found what they found.
Trump calling Nunes' announcement vindication. Days later, it turns out that officials inside Trump's White House were the source of the documents shown to Nunes.
We believe that this is nothing more than just an effort to roll more smoke bombs into an investigation that was making progress.
Now, there are legitimate questions about the protocols for unmasking names. Those are open questions asked by both parties. There's also a question as to whether that unmasked information, after it was shared with a senior national security official, was then shared with other officials or possibly leaked. But based on what we know now, the information out there now, Chris and Allison, we don't know that. And unmasking by itself, certainly not a crime and also certainly not unusual.
But sure is being used as fuel for suspicion. That's for sure.
That is really useful information, Jim. Please stay with us. We want to bring in the rest of our panel to discuss all of this. We have reporter and editor-at-large for CNN Politics, Chris Cillizza, and CNN counterterrorism analyst and former CIA counterterrorism official Philip Mudd. Phil, President Trump has every reason to try to change the subject from whatever connections his campaign team was having with Russians. Some say today what we're seeing, this is an effort to do this. So explain to us if what Susan Rice did, if it is proven that she had these names unmasked, why that is business as usual.
Sure, and let's be clear, you say the president has every reason to divert the conversation. White Houses, since the beginning of time, have the appropriate responsibility in some ways to spin the news in the direction they want to spin it. This is purposefully misleading the American people. That's different than spin. Let's take this and put it in context. Going back to the fall, everybody in America knows that we had questions, including questions coming from the White House, about inappropriate Russian intervention in the American election, stealing emails, for example, from both sides of the aisle. Then going into January, President Obama, at that point on January 2nd, sanctions the Russians for this activity. Now, what are you doing if you're Susan Rice at this point? You're reading information, including intercepts, about how the Russians are responding to these sanctions. And I'm going to guess in this situation, you're seeing information in those intercepts that indicate the Russians are talking to American person number one, American person number two. And as the national security advisor, you got to be saying, I need to know who these Americans are who are interfering with the president's right to sanction the Russians. So she says, this is where unmasking comes in, I need to know who these Americans are. Let me flip this. If she had said, I don't have an interest in knowing which Americans are interfering, I think that would have been dereliction of duty. But let's be clear. This is not spin from the White House. This is misleading the American people on something that is common practice in the intelligence business, Allison.
I mean, look, Mr. Cillizza, what we keep seeing is the White House avoiding the discussion of Russian interference. It has become synonymous in their minds with they did something wrong. And that does a disservice to truth here, because we need to know what happened with this hacking, who knew, who might have helped, and how to avoid it going forward. And to that point, the White House wants to talk about this unmasking and play on the ignorance of that process. They do not want to talk on yet another weird meeting between someone connected to Trump and someone connected to Russia. This one happening in the Seychelles with the founder of Blackwater, who just happens to be the brother of Betsy DeVos, who's now the education secretary. His name is Eric Prince. Well, he's not in the administration. Why do we care? That is an improper suggestion. He's close to Bannon. He has been known and connected to advising efforts for President Trump in Trump Tower, down in Washington, D.C. He's a relevant person. What do you make of this meeting?
Yeah, I'll add, gave $250,000 to a Donald Trump super PAC. You know, I mean, that's not a small amount of money. What I make of it is that where there's smoke and smoke and smoke and smoke and smoke, you should investigate whether there's fire. I'm not saying there is fire, but Donald Trump's best course here, this has been true since the beginning, is to say, you know what? I didn't do anything wrong, which is what he says publicly. And then he should say, and that's why we should have a full-scale investigation into this. Let Congress look into it as much as possible. The problem here, and Phil and Jim make this point really importantly, is basically what they are doing here is saying, oh, unmasking over here. See, they were. It's an allegation in search of evidence, and that's what it has been from the start, Chris. He made a tweet on a Saturday morning based on something he read in Breitbart. That is a fact. The FBI, the CIA, Devin Nunes, everyone who looks at this stuff says there is zero evidence that Trump Tower was wiretapped. They're ordered by the president, although he couldn't even really do that. But that allegation, that is separate from what we're talking about here. And I think the goal is to try to just conflate it, put it all in a mix, muddy the waters, and say, well, at the end of the day, I was sort of right, which is what Trump is saying. And it's just not, on the facts, on the merits, it's not right.
Hey, Jim, back to Susan Rice for a second. And this is one of the things that's raising eyebrows about her from the White House as well as right-wing media. She was asked about this and about the unmasking on PBS something like 10 days ago. I might have that date wrong. And she said something to the effect of, I don't know anything about that. Could she have said at that time, yes, I was quite concerned about some masked names that I saw, and I asked to know the identities?
Absolutely. I mean, she could have. I mean, she could have explained at that point that that's part of the job. It happens. Not just her, but other senior national security officials, and not just related to Trump, and not just related to Russia, but related to a whole host of intelligence reports that these officials see every day. She didn't do that. Certainly a lost opportunity.
But, well, I mean, do we know why? Has she explained, or her
did she lie?
Explained why?
The fact is, I don't know. I do know this because I asked that question of people close to her yesterday, and they said that from her perspective, she doesn't know what specific unmasking Devin Nunes, Trump, and others are talking about, in part because that is something that she asks, she says, or asked during the regular course of her work as the National Security Advisor. She asked to unmask names, you know, in multiple intelligence reports, some related to Russia and some not. And be clear, you remember Devin Nunes, when he first came out with this, didn't say specifically that it was Russia. It was others as well. And I noted this earlier in the broadcast, that when you do ask these questions, they are meticulously logged by law. You know, you can't do it in secret. There's a paper trail of it. So we don't know what the explanation is for her comment there. But I do know from speaking to people yesterday close to her that she doesn't know specifically what Devin Nunes and others are accusing her of when it comes to unmasking, because that's something she did during the regular course of her job.
But Phil, to what you call purposeful deception here, even if you assume Susan Rice was lying, she's being shady, she didn't want people to know what's going on, fine, let's assume that. But Phil Mudd, she wasn't shady enough to cover her tracks in trying to get these names unmasked in the first place. She went through the paperwork. So she wound up creating a paper trail that wound up unearthing her own deception. That doesn't make any sense either.
It doesn't make sense to me, and one of the directions I'm looking at is who decided to release her name and all these accusations about leaks. My guess is that was not the intelligence community. That's somebody who wanted to divert attention away from the Russia conversation. But let me pick up for just a moment to ensure we understand the formality of this process that Jim was just talking about. When you're in the room and an intelligence briefer gives you a document, a top secret document that says, for example, a Russian official, a Russian diplomat was talking to U.S. person number 1. That's how it reads. And you say, in the case that I'm familiar with, you're the FBI director, I need to know who U.S. person number 1 is because I need to know who's communicating inappropriately maybe with a Russian diplomat. That goes into a formal process. The briefer doesn't just say, well, that's John Doe. You've got to go back and make a formal request. Your name is logged. So when she made those requests, she had to know that this is going to appear in logs until the end of time, that her name was at that point potentially searchable. So to suggest that there was some sort of underhanded process here is not appropriate. She did what a lot of intel guys do.
Panel, thank you. There's so much to get our minds around, and you have really helped us this morning. Thanks, guys.
And these days, it seems like, you know, you have to pay attention to what's not being talked about because there's so much distraction going on. Here's a point in that way. The Trump White House is going after former President Obama's law enforcement agency. Why? Attorney General Jeff Sessions is ordering the Justice Department to review police reforms that were put in place in the past 8 years. CNN senior Washington correspondent Joe Johns live at the White House with more. This was an eyebrow popper, you know, go through this difficult process of finding admissions of fault, finding things that can be changed, and now they want to undo those or question them or second guess them. Why?
Well, Chris, it's important because it's, number one, a signal and perhaps a sign that the Justice Department under President Trump, as well as Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, is looking to reverse course or at least change direction on the issue of policing police departments around the country. The Attorney General putting out a memo essentially telling the Justice Department that it wants a comprehensive review of, among other things, the consent decrees that the Justice Department has entered into with a number of cities around the country, including Baltimore, most recently, which had so much unrest due to allegations of police use of excessive force. So the Justice Department now saying they want a comprehensive review of the reform activities. We actually have part of that memo for you in a graphic. It says, misdeeds of individual bad actors should not impugn or undermine the legitimate and honorable work that law enforcement officers or agencies perform in keeping America's communities safe. So this is a campaign promise from Donald Trump to essentially take the handcuffs off of police departments, and this memo by Jeff Sessions appearing to be the very first step. Back to you.
Okay, Joe, thank you very much for all of that reporting. So, back to this story where the White House is using the unmasking of Trump associates to support the president's unfounded wiretapping claims. But those are two separate issues. Congressman Jim Himes next on the latest.
I'm going to show you.
Fox News hit with a new lawsuit filed by a contributor who accuses the network's founder, Roger Ailes, of sexual harassment. This as new accusers are coming forward against Fox News host Bill O'Reilly. The New York Times reports that the network and O'Reilly have paid out $13 million to 5 women. Now, 2 companies have pulled advertisements from his show as of last night. Now, O'Reilly did not address the allegations on his show last night, but said in a statement that he is vulnerable to lawsuits because of his status. One of his new accusers, who has not filed a lawsuit and says she is not seeking any money, spoke to CNN's Don Lemon last night about O'Reilly. Here's a piece.
I was asked to be on his show as a regular guest, and 3 weeks into it, I got kind of an exciting email from his secretary saying, Mr. O'Reilly's coming out to Los Angeles and he'd like to have dinner with you. I said, absolutely, because I wanted to talk to him about my career prospects. He brought it up at the beginning of the dinner, basically said Roger Ailes is a good friend of his and they plan on making me a contributor. At the end of the dinner, he simply said, let's get out of here. And there was this awkward moment where we couldn't find each other, and then he caught up with me and said, no, come back to my suite. And I simply said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And he said, what, you think I'm going to attack you? And so anyway, at that point he became hostile, and then he spent some time weaning me off the show. I did what...
All right, joining us now is one of the reporters behind that New York Times investigation, Emily Steele, along with contributing editor for Vanity Fair and author of War at the Wall Street Journal, Sarah Ellison. It's good to have you both here. Let me start with you, Emily. In terms of the reporting, how confident are you? What do you think you're dealing with in terms of scale and scope, in terms of what we know about Fox News culture?
We're very confident in the reporting, which is why we were able to go forward with this story and put it on the front page of the New York Times. And what we found is that there were 5 settlements with women who had made allegations that Bill O'Reilly had sexually harassed them or otherwise treated them inappropriately. One of the interesting things is 2 of those deals, 2 of those settlements were struck in the months since Roger Ailes had left the network, and another one Fox did not know about until late 2016. It was a secret deal that Bill O'Reilly had struck in 2011.
Please jump in whenever, because you guys know so much more about this than I do. But when I learned that in your reporting about the timing, it suggested to me more of a window into culture, right? Because there is somewhat of a temptation to put it all on Ailes. This began and ended with him, and now Fox News is clean and pure because he is no longer there. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, that was certainly the storyline that Fox wanted everyone to come out of the summer with, is that they had launched an investigation. It was with a real law firm. They had gotten to the bottom of this. Ailes, it was stunning that he had left the company that he founded. And James and Lachlan Murdoch were there and saying, we want this to be a transparent, open, safe culture for women. Everything's fine. Everyone's moving on. We obviously see that this is the kind of a problem in a workplace that is much harder to eradicate. And while they were saying all those things, and while they were putting out those statements and making those sorts of grand pronouncements about the future, they knew that these settlements were there with Bill O'Reilly, and they weren't announcing them. And this is a business. They have a business to run, and they don't want to sacrifice their biggest star, who pulls in $500 million a year over 2 years. He's worth a lot to the company. And so it really makes you look at that investigation this summer a little differently. As was that an effort to kind of whitewash some of the problems, or was it sort of an effort to just have a great public relations moment, or were they really serious about getting to the bottom of the problem?
And what we know too is that it's not just Roger Ailes or Bill O'Reilly who've had accusations made against them. There was a woman named Tamara Holder who Fox News struck a settlement worth more than $2.5 million with. And she had made allegations that a man had sexually assaulted her, a Fox News executive, in the company headquarters.
Now, one of the things that you have to deal with in reporting this, and frankly dealing with it legally, is what is real and what is opportunistic, where once you know an organization is vulnerable, and I think by any estimation, you'd have to qualify Fox News as vulnerable on this issue. Now I can come forward, or much more likely, a female can come forward and say something happened, and they're going to settle because they're worried about the exposure. Do you believe there is any real risk at that, or that is a factor at all in what we're seeing there?
Well, that's certainly what Bill O'Reilly said, that he is a target and because of his prominence. And the other thing that you hear is that sometimes companies do settle these allegations, not necessarily because there is merit, because they don't want the bad headlines. They don't want the cost of going to trial.
I mean, I think that there are two things. One is that the Ailes scenario was one where we heard very similar stories from lots of different women. And so that, Julie Roginski yesterday, her suit really looked quite similar to some of the other women. That's something that I'm pretty confident that the claims in that suit have some backup evidence for what those are. Of course, Ailes and O'Reilly have denied these claims very, very vehemently. There can be some opportunism, but I think you look at a company like this, it's very hard not to see with this number of women that are coming forward. This is not a fun thing for women to do. I don't think that people who are coming forward come out of it with the badge of honor or feel like they're particularly more employable than they were before they made the claims. So I think...
proof of purpose, you can track it. You can look at women who have made these claims that became high profile, and you see what has happened to their career lights after that.
What's interesting is the 5 women who received settlements after making accusations against Bill O'Reilly haven't worked in TV news again.
And in terms of culture change, I think that's the point.
Right.
What do you think in a situation like Fox News will make a difference?
Well, I think it takes a long time, in fact. You know, Bill O'Reilly is still there. He helped...
He just redid his contract.
He had just renewed his contract. Roger Ailes basically founded the network with Rupert Murdoch, and Bill O'Reilly was their first big star, and has remained so. He is the biggest star that they have today. I think that, you know, while you have all of the other people who are still there, you have all of the kind of executives who supported Ailes and were there along the way. There's an apparatus that supported him. Now they were following his orders, and everyone pinned everything on Ailes. But I think if you're a woman in that environment, or a man in that environment, or anyone in that culture, you look around and you wonder what really has changed. Now they brought in a new human resources person who put out a statement yesterday, and they said, here are all the numbers that you can call. I think it's very intimidating to actually make those calls, and I think it just takes a long time. I don't think that there's necessarily ill intent all over the organization, but they haven't taken some of the steps clearly to make people feel like it's a safe place to work.
And the timing that they brought up about that Emily brought up about these latest settlements coming after Roger Ailes is going to add some smoke to the situation. But Sarah, thank you very much.
Thank
you.
And
Emily, I appreciate it. We look forward to the reporting always. Thanks to you, our international viewers, for watching us. For you, CNN Newsroom is next. But for our U.S. viewers, we have a lot of news. What do you say? Let's get after it.
Under the previous administration are being examined across the government. Yes. That's their whole point and agenda. Welcome back to Early Start. I'm Christine Romans.
And I'm Dave Briggs. Congrats to the Tar Heels, 4:31 Eastern Time. Amid the constant drip of connections between the president's associates and Russia, one topic that's gotten some attention, but not much, is unmasking. And now the president doing his best to make unmasking sound illegal, fighting off a barrage of tweets that seemed aimed at cooking up a scandal to distract from what might be a real one.
So what are we talking about here? All this began with a Fox News report that a high-ranking Obama official requested the unmasking of the names of Trump officials caught up in surveillance. That was followed by a Bloomberg News report naming President Obama's national security advisor, Susan Rice, as the official who requests the unmasking, citing a leak from U.S. officials. So what are we talking about? Unmasking is where a U.S. official requests the identity of an otherwise unnamed American caught up in surveillance of foreigners. But unmasking is not the same as leaking. An unmasked identity is only revealed to officials authorized to know.
So after months of Trump supporters complaining about the source of leaks rather than the substance of them, the leak of the Susan Rice information has the president trying to stir the pot. For more on unmasking and the response from Susan Rice, let's bring in CNN's Jim Sciutto in Washington.
Dave and Christine, a source close to Ambassador Susan Rice tells me that the claims that she improperly unmasked the names of U.S. citizens caught up in surveillance is, in a word, false. That's coming from Ambassador Rice. But I've also spoken to former senior intelligence officials from both Democratic and Republican administrations to ask him about the process of unmasking. Is it unusual? Is it illegal? And their answer is unanimously no, not unusual, not illegal. They say a couple of things. One, the law allows this. Two, for it to happen, the official requests it, but the U.S. intelligence community has to approve that request. Oftentimes it is approved because that intelligence official wants to provide more information to the senior national security official. As they're reading intelligence reports, they want to know more about what they mean, the significance. That information is shared only between the briefer from the intelligence community and that official. It's not more widely disseminated. Now, it's possible that that official could do that him or herself, but by the nature of it, it is only exchanged one-to-one. There are open questions here. How extensive was the unmasking? What was the justification for it? But this we know, this I know from speaking to multiple intelligence officials, that this practice is not unusual. It happens. And two, it's certainly not illegal. There are protocols for this specifically established after 9/11 to allow for this unmasking under certain rules. Christine and Dave?
Thank you, Jim. For her part, though, Susan Rice was asked last month on PBS NewsHour about the allegation that Trump officials were incidentally surveilled during the transition. Here's what she said.
I know nothing about this. I was surprised to see reports from Chairman Nunes on that count today.
Now, look, that certainly speaks to the credibility of Susan Rice, as does the whole Benghazi situation where she misled the American public that had to do with an internet video. She's going to have to speak why she was surprised to learn of that if she, in fact, asked for the unmasking.
And the exact question was about what? The exact question?
Unintentional surveillance of Trump transition officials.
Not about...
It was very direct and very spot on this subject.
Not about the Obama administration wiretapping.
Correct. Also, we need to know, why did she ask for the unmasking? Was it in the interest of national security? Because if it was not, it could have been in the interest of purely politics, which certainly would be a problem.
You could see a situation where whoever it is who was surveilling the White House, she wanted to make other people in the intelligence community aware of how serious that was. That would be one argument.
Yes.
We just don't know.
We need to know more.
We just don't know.
Yes.
The web of connections between the president, his associates, and Russia seems to be spreading further this morning. The Washington Post is reporting on a secret meeting in early January between a Russian connected to President Vladimir Putin and the founder of Blackwater, the Blackwater security firm, Eric Prince. The meeting took place on the isolated Seychelles Islands in the Indian Ocean. The Post sources saying the meeting was to set up a back-channel line of communication between the Kremlin and President-elect Trump, or at least an attempt to do that. Eric Prince was not a part of the Trump campaign or transition, but he does have ties to Trump's inner circle, including chief strategist Steve Bannon and his sister, Betsy DeVos, is the Secretary of Education. The White House says it was, quote, not aware of any meetings Prince had, and a spokesman for Prince calls this claim of a connection, quote, a complete fabrication. The House Intelligence Committee plans to meet at noon today. That's right, the House Intelligence Committee plans to meet at noon today with the future of its Russia investigation hanging in the balance. The full committee convened last night for the first time since its top Democrat, Adam Schiff, called on Republican Chairman Devin Nunes to recuse himself. The topic of Russia and its alleged ties to the Trump administration will be on the table. A highly unusual trip to the White House by Nunes 2 weeks ago. I dare say an infamous trip to the White House, we should say, now 2 weeks ago, that has been talked about ad nauseum. It idled the committee and called into question its ability to proceed with a credible investigation. After a pause, now it looks as though they are going to begin again with some hearings.
Again, a little context here. Now that we know these documents came from the NSC, the National Security Council, Devin Nunes had to view them at the White House. That's where you would see those documents. So it gives him a little cover for why he was there. But a showdown of historic proportions unfolding in the Senate this week over Supreme Court nominee Neil Gorsuch. By CNN's count, at least 43 Democrats now oppose the president's pick. That's enough to sustain a filibuster and block confirmation unless Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell follows through on his threat to invoke the nuclear option. That means changing the rules so only a simple majority of 51 votes would be needed to push through Gorsuch and likely all future Supreme Court nominees. It is not certain whether all 52 Republican senators will back McConnell if he decides to deploy that nuclear option. If just 3 members of his party balk at the idea, the rule change would not have enough support to pass, and Gorsuch's nomination could be blocked. We'll ask Ellis Hennigan and David Drucker about this in the 5 a.m. hour.
All right, police reforms enacted by the Obama administration could be in jeopardy. Attorney General Jeff Sessions ordering a review of all agreements made with troubled departments. He wants to make sure they don't conflict with the president's goal of promoting officer safety and morale while fighting violent crime. Since 2009, the Justice Department has conducted 25 investigations into law enforcement agencies and is currently enforcing 14 consent decrees and agreements.
House Republicans seeming close to a reboot of their health care overhaul after all. Vice President Mike Pence meeting with House Freedom Caucus Chairman Mark Meadows to pitch a new proposal that essentially gives states more flexibility to repeal Obamacare regulations like those essential health benefits. The Freedom Caucus helped sink the administration's first repeal and replace bill. Chairman Meadows says he is intrigued by the new approach but needs to see more details. House Republicans will discuss the plan when they meet later this morning for their weekly caucus. The Trump administration plans to file an appeal on Friday in an attempt to lift a court order blocking its six-nation travel ban. The case will be heard in May by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. That's the same court that ruled against the president's first travel ban. Last month, a federal judge in Hawaii halted the administration's revised executive order, ruling it likely violated the Constitution by targeting Muslims.
All right, 4:39, 4:40 a.m. in the East. Today is Equal Pay Day. What is that? Its significance: to earn the same amount as male counterparts make in 1 year, women would have to work 1 year and part of the next year. That extra time ends today. Women earn about 80 cents for every dollar men make. This is according to the Census Bureau. Works out to be a little more than $10,000 less per year. For a 20-year-old entering the workforce, it amounts to $418,000 over a 40-year working career. Now, the pay gap changes dramatically when you factor in race. Hispanic women earn just 54 cents compared to what a white male earns. African-American women make 63 cents on the dollar. And Asian women have a narrower gap, about 85 cents. That's the narrowest gap, actually, that exists, Asian women. That's according to the National Women's Law Center. So why and what's being done about it? Well, the gap has been closing slowly over the past 20 years. Experts say only really Congress has the power to act on a national scale, and companies are also partially responsible, but many keep their pay data private. As for today, Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In organization teaming up with businesses to offer 20% discounts to make up for the pay gap. For the next week, shoppers can get the discount on Luna bars, and Procter & Gamble products. Ride-sharing service Lyft will donate 20% of each rides today to charity. Local stores in 25 cities are also joining in on the discounts. I'd rather not have a discount, America. I'd rather make sure all those companies and everybody is paying the same.
Pass judgment on that.
No, but you know, the thing is about even
that's
when
not going to make up the gap.
No. But even when you adjust for two people with the same education, the same age, in the same job, no matter what the category is, men make a little bit more. And the why is what's been fascinating, and I've done a lot of work over this over the years. It's not just raw discrimination, and it's not just the maternity tax that women step out and then they lose opportunities when they're out for 3 months when they have a baby. It's a whole bunch of different things. So, I mean, I'm actually encouraged.
Is negotiation a part of this, though?
You know, some people say it is.
Maybe in Hollywood. And
but I don't, I don't really worry about people making a few $1 million more than a few $1 million more than other people are making. I worry more about rank and file women,
At least it's changing, but clearly way too slow.
At some census statistics that show that unmarried, college-educated women in big cities, they make more than their male counterparts. So maybe it's millennial women who are finally going to take everything that
they're going to take charge and not accept it.
Maybe. All right. Since taking office, President Trump has earned $78,332 in salary as commander-in-chief. He just donated it all to the National Park Service, turning over a check to Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke. The money will be used for improvements to the nation's historic battlefields, which are $229 million behind in deferred maintenance. The Sierra Club calls the donation a publicity stunt, pointing out the president is currently trying to slash the budget for national parks to historic lows.
Drop in the bucket, in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, look, I love me some Revolutionary Civil War battlefields. I think that's a
field trip.
Field trip.
Let's do this. All right, breaking overnight, the death toll rising in that deadly attack on the metro in St. Petersburg, Russia. Officials now revealing the identity of the bomber. We'll take you there live next. All right, breaking news. Authorities in Russia identifying the suspect behind the deadly bombing of a metro station in St. Petersburg. The blast killed 14 people and left 51 others injured. Kremlin describing the incident as a terrorist attack. Let's go live to St. Petersburg, Russia. Bring in CNN's Oren Lieberman with the very latest. Good morning to you. We know the individual. Is yet any group taking credit, Oren?
No group has yet taken credit, but still we're less than 24 hours since this attack happened, and that identity of the suspect has just come out from Kyrgyzstan security authorities, who say the man behind this deadly bombing that happened a short distance from us from the metro station where we're standing right here is Akbarjon Jalilov, born in 1995. That makes him 21 or 22 years old, born in Kyrgyzstan, a Russian citizen. That is who authorities say is behind this deadly bombing. It was 11 dead. It has just risen to 14 dead and dozens more wounded. As that happens, there is still a flurry of activity happening here behind me. There are some 9 to 10 fire trucks as well as 2 paramedics. They've run at least 3 different fire hoses and blocked off the Sanaya Square station. It is between this station and the next station down the subway line. That is where this explosion happened, and just a short distance past that is where police found another unexploded device, a kilogram of TNT hidden within a fire extinguisher. We don't have an explanation for this flurry of activity yet, but we're certainly keeping an eye on it, especially as they keep this station closed. So again, the major update is that authorities have identified a suspect here, 21 or 22-year-old Akbarjon Jalilov. He is from Kyrgyzstan. He is a Russian citizen. That answers the who. That tells us who is behind this. Now the investigators are working on the how and the why, and the question of was Jalilov working alone.
Right. All right, Oren, we'll check in with you next hour. Thank you.
Okay, what happens when 2 iconic internet companies join forces? Apparently one very boring name.
Inexplicable, right?
We're going to check on CNN Money Stream next.
Not a good reception online. He may be the person that President Trump trusts the most. Son-in-law Jared Kushner's White House portfolio already includes advising the president, brokering Mideast peace, leading the Office of American Innovation to overhaul bureaucracy, restore the Department of Veterans Affairs to help end drug addiction, and shadowing the Secretary of State, maintaining relations with Mexico, Canada, and China. That's all. Now you can add Iraq to the list. Kushner is there traveling with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, meeting with Iraq's prime minister on U.S.-led coalition and the fight against ISIS. Whew. CNN's Ben Wiedemann has it all covered for us live in Erbil with more. Good morning, Ben. What's the essential mission of this trip to Iraq?
Well, I think in the case of the 36-year-old Jared Kushner, it is get to know the place. He's never been here. He doesn't have any military or diplomatic experience, so he's being accompanied by the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff and the general who coordinates the international coalition against ISIS. Yesterday, they were in Baghdad meeting with senior Iraqi officials, including Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi. We understand that part of their trip will also include a visit to the northern part of the country, where they may be meeting with the U.S. forces involved in the offensive against ISIS in Mosul, where that battle at the moment is proving to be quite difficult, really house to house, street to street fighting, particularly in the old city. This is a fight in the western part of Mosul where we've seen mounting civilian casualties, in which, of course, it's believed the United States may have had a role in a series of airstrikes on the 17th of March, although the precise details of that particular day are not altogether clear. Now, Mr. Trump, the father-in-law of Mr. Kushner, the president, has in the past said some things that have riled some Iraqis. For instance, he did say as a candidate and as a president that the United States should have taken Iraq's oil after the 2003 U.S.-led invasion. President Trump also did include Iraq in his initial travel ban, although it was later removed. So some Iraqis not altogether thrilled with this president. Others, however, going back to an old Iraqi tradition, do admire a strong man. Dave?
No doubt about that. Thank you, Ben.
All right, the National Hockey League at odds with its Players Association. A Twitter storm from the commander-in-chief. We'll talk about the differences between unmasking and leaking and what may be lost in translation.
Well, the Republicans changed the Senate rules to confirm Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. It's their only option now that Democrats have enough support to sustain a filibuster.
And the Attorney General ordering a review of all police reforms nationwide. What does this move mean for the changes enacted under the previous administration? Hint, it means any changes made under the previous administration are being reviewed. Good morning and welcome to Early Start. I'm Christine Romans.
And I'm Dave Briggs. It is Tuesday, April 4th, 5 a.m. in the East. A lot to get to. First up, amid the constant drip of connections between the president and Russia, that topic's gotten some attention, but not much has been given to unmasking. Now the president taking a bit of a leap, doing his best to make unmasking sound illegal, firing off a barrage of tweets that seem aimed at cooking up a scandal to distract from potentially a real one.
All this began with a Fox News report that a high-ranking Obama official had requested the unmasking of the names of Trump officials caught up in surveillance. That was followed by Bloomberg News. Bloomberg News naming President Obama's national security advisor, Susan Rice, as the official who requested the unmasking, citing a leak from U.S. officials.
So what is unmasking? Is it where a U.S. official requests the identity of an otherwise unnamed American caught up in surveillance of foreigners? Unmasking is not the same as leaking because an unmasked identity is only revealed to officials authorized to know. Now, for more on unmasking and the response from Susan Rice, let's bring in CNN's Jim Sciutto in Washington.
Dave and Christine, a source close to Ambassador Susan Rice tells me that the claims that she improperly unmasked the names of U.S. citizens caught up in surveillance is, in a word, false. That's coming from Ambassador Rice. But I've also spoken to former senior intelligence officials from both Democratic and Republican administrations to ask them about the process of unmasking. Is it unusual? Is it illegal? And their answer is unanimously no, not unusual, not illegal. They say a couple of things. One, the law allows this. Two, for it to happen, the official requests it, but the U.S. intelligence community has to approve that request. Oftentimes it is approved because that intelligence official wants to provide more information to the senior national security official. As they're reading intelligence reports, they want to know more about what they mean, the significance. That information is shared only between the briefer from the intelligence community and that official. It's not more widely disseminated. Now, it's possible that that official could do that him or herself, but by the nature of it, it is only exchanged one-to-one. There are open questions here. How extensive was the unmasking? What was the justification for it? But this we know, this I know from speaking to multiple intelligence officials, that this practice is not unusual. It happens. And two, it's certainly not illegal. There are protocols for this specifically established after 9/11 to allow for this unmasking under certain rules. Christine and Dave?
All right, Jim Sciutto had a very busy day yesterday working his sources, trying to get clarity on all that. Thank you for that, Jim. The web of connections between the president, his associates, and Russia seems to be spreading. The Washington Post reporting on a secret meeting in early January between a Russian connected to President Vladimir Putin and the founder of the Blackwater security firm, Eric Prince.
The meeting took place on the isolated Seychelles Islands in the Indian Ocean. The Post sources saying the meeting was an attempt to set up a back-channel line of communication between the Kremlin and President-elect Trump. Eric Prince was not a part of the Trump campaign or transition, but he does have ties to Trump's inner circle, including Chief Strategist Steve Bannon. Prince's sister, Betsy DeVos, is Secretary of Education. The White House says it was not aware of any meetings Prince had, and a spokesman for Prince calls the claim of a connection, quote, a complete fabrication.
Yeah, and the Washington Post saying it was the United Arab Emirates involved in connecting those two. So fascinating piece in the Washington Post this morning. The House Intelligence Committee plans to meet at noon today with the future of its Russia investigation.
It's a former